We've been hearing the story of a mendicant, a yogi, who was able to possess the power to materialise the thoughts of the mind. His mind was so pure. Curiously, he's not got a name. He's just called a mendicant. You'd think that somebody with such an ability would have become famous. The ability to materialise his thoughts. And he got a bit tired of his meditation and thought how he might be born as a tribesman. And then he gets a name. He gets the name Jivata. So clearly this mendicant is not real. If he was real, he'd have had a name. So it's obvious this mendicant is symbolic of the absolute Brahman, which we don't really like to say too much about because we don't want to conceptualize it. So this mendicant, this absolute, proceeded into conceptualization and then gained the name Jivata. And he got drunk, he slept, and then when he slept he dreamt that he was a Brahmana, endowed with knowledge of the scriptures. He lived the righteous life, then he became a king. He dreamt he was a mighty emperor, and then, as kings do, he dreamt of a nymph, and then he became the nymph, and the nymph became a deer, and then a creeper, and then a bee, and then an elephant. And it repeats itself a few times until it becomes a swan. So is this, in this current chapter 63, these steps are retraced. And this is a very important practice that we're getting here. It's similar to the first knowledge of the Buddha. The Buddha is said to have acquired 3 knowledges, and the first one was recollection of past lives. This has to be understood in terms of immediate spiritual practice. Our awareness is moving all the time. Our attention is moving all the time. Wherever the attention goes, that's what it identifies with. It can identify with things weakly, in which case it moves on to something else, or it can identify with things strongly. We identify with our notions and beliefs very strongly, our opinions about who we are, who we think we are, and who we think we are in relationship to others. But let's just look at this practice. We're going to get this practice described here, whereby the swan realizes his nature as Rudra, the absolute. Then Rudra recollects all his incarnations. Before I do that, I just want to read this passage from a book called The Twilight Language, which I've mentioned before, by Roderick, Bucknell and Martin Stuart-Fox. I'm going to read this passage because it's very pertinent to this whole notion of birth and death. The main difficulty lies in the interpretation of the word birth. Most of us don't understand what the word birth refers to and are likely to take it in the everyday sense of physical birth from a mother's body. It does not refer to physical birth as generally supposed. The mistaken assumption that this word birth refers to physical birth is a major obstacle to comprehending the Buddha's teaching and also to the Yoga Vasistha teaching. Now we hear talk of rebirth, birth again and again, and of the suffering that inevitably goes with it. This is what we get. Just what is this rebirth? What is it that is reborn? The birth referred to is a mental event, something taking place in the mind, the non-physical side of our makeup. Birth in everyday language is birth from a mother. Birth in Dharma language is birth from ignorance, craving, clinging, the arising of the false notion of I and mine. Clearly, birth refers to nothing other than the arising of the idea I. This is on page 83. It's actually a quote from another book. the books by Buddhadasa. It's called Another Kind of Birth. So we must get away from this idea of thinking of birth as a physical event. It's something that's happening all the time. It's whenever the notion I arises. And this is what's been happening with the mendicant. He's going through lots of I's, lots of different I's. So he's ended up as a swan. Vasistha continued, that swan once beheld Lord Rudra, and in its heart there arose a conviction, I am Rudra. Instantly it abandoned its body as swan and became Rudra, and that Rudra dwelt in the abode of Rudra. However, since Rudra was endowed with true knowledge, he remembered all that had taken place. Rudra recollected thus, behold, how mysterious is this Maya which deludes all the worlds. Though it is unreal, it appears to be real. First of all, in that infinite consciousness which was myself, there arose the mind with objective consciousness, though yet cosmic and omniscient. So this objective consciousness is the beginning of the tendency towards the notion of an ego, an I. Then, accidentally, I happened to be the Jiva, which felt attracted to and charmed by the finest part of the cosmic elements. Therefore, during a certain creation cycle, I became the mendicant, who remained totally unagitated. So this mendicant was a very pure being. He was able to overcome all distractions and remain immersed in the practice of contemplation. However, every subsequent action is more powerful than a previous act. The mendicant considered himself Jivata, and so did he become. So whenever this absolute awareness conceptualizes something, that's what happens. That's what awareness identifies with. There's nothing uncommon about this. It's quite miraculous, but it's not uncommon. Awareness does this. Awareness identifies with whatever it's aware of. In fact, there's no difference between awareness and what it identifies with. After that, he bethought he was a Brahmana. Surely the more powerful thought form overwhelms the weaker one. This is wherever the attention is at, or wherever the attention is drawn to. The attention is one thing because it's on that thing. It's drawn to other things, and if that attraction is more powerful, that's what it will go to. Otherwise it stays where it is. The attention goes to the more powerful thought form. Then in course of time, on account of persistent contemplation, he became a king. Surely, water imbibed by the plant becomes its fruit. Associated with raw pleasures are nymphs. Contemplating them, the deer became a nymph. Purely on account of infatuation, this nymph became a deer. The deer became a creeper, which was obsessed with the idea that it would be pierced and a hole would be made. This must be the sorts of things that creepers worry about. Contemplating the bee, it became a bee, which then pierced a hole in the creeper. The bee became an elephant. So what we've got here is the insight practice. We're following the train of awareness back to itself. This is the self-inquiry. It's expressed here in terms of different lives, but it's really just the attention going from one thing to the other. You might just be wondering, well, what's it like to be a bee? And because the mendicant's mind was pure, it got totally involved in that. It didn't get distracted from it. So all these are distractions from the self, but eventually it comes back to itself in the form here of Rudra. I am Rudra, who has been a Rudra during the past 100 creation cycles, and I roam this world appearance which is nothing more than a psychological delusion. In one creation cycle I was Jivata, in another I was the Brahmana, in another I was the king, and in yet another I was the swan. Thus have I been revolving in this wheel known as the mind and the body.